Welcome to Dialogues in Design. Today we are going to be talking to Mike LaValley. Mike is an architect and writer from Buffalo, New York, empowering other architects to overcome chronic burnout, engineer self-awareness, and build thriving careers. Blogging since 2015, his writing has been featured in several industry publications, including Architizer, Young Architect, To Scale, and the AIA Young Architects Forum. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be here and talk about architecture and emerging professionals and whatever topics we want to get into.
A lot of young graduates are in that strange phase after university, excited, talented, but nervous and unsure. To begin with, I'd like to go back to your journey. What part of your younger self did you have to unlearn to become the professional you are today?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny because right now I'm 41 years old and I have had about 17 or 18 years of experience in the profession. So I have learned a lot of things and unlearned a lot of things that are good and bad. Um, I think the one thing that I had to sort of unlearn was in particular, I'll just admit this, I went to a very prestigious school here in America, to Syracuse University, and it has one of the top 2 or 3 bachelor degrees for undergrad. And I was very full of myself, I guess, as I was coming out of school and just thinking, oh, I can do absolutely everything and it's all on me. And I think you realize very quickly that architecture and design and building is very much a team sport. It's very much a collaborative process. And when you don't lean into the strengths of other people, it becomes very hard to do things on your own. So I think that was one thing that I had to learn very quickly was it's not that I didn't like collaborating in school. It's just more that I felt like I was more that auteur or that like main designer, and I had to be the person who decides absolutely everything. And I think when I over time started to collaborate more and really found, oh wait, there's really interesting people, cool people out there doing their own expertise and trying to understand how they think about architecture and the world and design. I think that was really a big unlock for me. And I was able to step back and really listen in the rooms that I was a part of versus telling people kind of this is how it's going to be. I think that was a big shift in how I thought about architecture.
That is really helpful. I'm glad you talked about teamwork. We are going to come to that. Before that, were there any pivotal moments early in your career that helped shape your professional philosophy?
Mm, I think that when I was first starting out, um, things that would shape me, like I'm still very interested in things like, and I don't know how popular they are today as much, but like places like Arc Daily and architecture magazines like Dwell. I really love Dwell magazine, actually. I like looking at how residential architecture is being developed across the world. And I think that there are lessons to be learned from the way that different, um, not just people in different places practice architecture, um, but I just infusing yourself with all those different kind of cultural touch points. I think by the studying process in school when you're looking for precedents to inform your own work doesn't stop after school. Like it really doesn't. And there's a lot of times where I find that you have to bring those ideas, especially to people who you're working with on the client side who are not in our world. They're not in that sort of design, living and breathing design kind of mentality. So by putting yourself out there and really looking for what are the new materials that are being used, what are the new practices that are being used across the world. I think those are the kinds of things that while I am still looking into them, research and development and trying to figure out things early on has really pushed the way that I think about architecture and design forward in some ways the most, because I'm seeing how in real time. Like architecture can be a long drawn out process. I'm on a project right now that is in its fourth or fifth year of from design through construction. And sometimes they're big and sometimes they take a couple months and then they're completely done from design to construction. And I think that by seeing how other people are doing things, you start to take what you think will work for you and kind of remove what you think won't work, either because of the region that you work in or um, just because of what you're interested in. And I think that that's really one of the lessons I learned very early on is just keep researching, keep looking for things, keep searching, keep being curious. Um, don't just let that muscle go just because you're outside of school.
That makes so much sense. Exposure is quite an important aspect of architecture. You often speak about habits and personal development. How have these habits helped influence your work as a professional?
Yeah. I think my habits and what I've developed over time for myself of just trying to create, honestly, set boundaries, very clear boundaries for the kinds of work that I'm doing so that I'm actually able to um, function not only as an architect, but also as a person in the field and at home. Um, I feel like the habits that I've really set for myself are try to, if possible, keep the same schedule every day. Um, like really, if you can, try to. The big one for me has been when it works and it's consistent is getting up early and having some early time for myself to do something either completely related to something I'm interested outside of work or I've gone through waves in my career where I have used that time to exercise, like doing something that is completely um, not related to architecture. I think helps a lot because then when I'm in the office, it it definitely helps me be more on and like focused on that moment. I think being sort of aware of where you are at any given moment. There's a quote that I keep thinking of a lot, which is whatever you're doing right now is the most important thing to you right now because it's where you are, it's what you're doing, it's what you've chosen to spend your time on. And if you are in that moment, how can you make the best of that moment? And how can you appreciate that moment? And um, I guess not let uh, like at work, sometimes we get into a bad habit. I know a lot of people who work very late and feel very much pressured by a lot of deadlines. And sometimes deadlines are real. But I've found that over time, good habits can start to outweigh bad habits. And you can start to, maybe not right away, not all at once, but you can start to sculpt the way that your schedule looks so that you are doing more of the things that you want to do and fewer of the things that you don't. And you can start to carve away that extra time that's needed for projects that you think you need. And maybe it's about rethinking how you are working in the projects or how you are interfacing with them. But I think that it's about making tiny tweaks and trying to learn about what works for you over time more than like the thing that I uh, see a lot of when I talk to people is everybody has their own priorities in their life and they have their own things that are going on, good and bad. And so it's hard for me to say, oh, well, you should do this, 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 and this. Uh, Most of the time uh, it's this idea of like little experiments or trying a couple things at a time so that you can start to weave those into your schedule and understand how they affect you in your work and your life. I think trying all the things all at once just makes you far more likely to burn out and just the whole thing kind of falls apart. So,
True. That is really insightful. You spoke about creating boundaries. How can we create boundaries as young professional in the difficult job market that is out there today?
best way to set boundaries is to be very clear with the people around you as often as you can. Sometimes I know it can be very uncomfortable to talk to people about the things that you are trying to create boundaries for. But I think the thing that I keep um, thinking of is that a boundary is meant to be something that you are setting for yourself, and that people, whether people react well or poorly to it, in some ways shouldn't matter, or shouldn't matter to the wrong people. So let me explain. If you were setting a boundary with the way that you spend your time, and there's a set expectation that you make clear with somebody you're working with, whether it's a team member or maybe it's talking to your boss, or you've tried to set up a clear boundary of like, I need to really leave at this time every day. I'll do my best to make sure that the outcomes that you want from your project that I'm working on are what they need to be, but that I really need to do this. And sometimes a good way to do that is even to set an actual activity after work that you need to like physically leave for, something that, whether it's like a class or a something probably more regular, something that is going to make it very convincing to say to another person, hey, I really have this great thing that I'm doing after work every day or every couple of days, and I really need to like leave right now. And I think saying those things and creating patterns for people around you really helps you create those boundaries a lot easier, because I think it's really hard for somebody to walk up, especially if they're an emerging professional, and be like, you know what, boss, I just like can't work right now because like I just need to leave. And I think that that's an uncomfortable conversation. So rather than coming at it like that full force, it's more of, there are good things that I'm trying to do around in my life to help me be a better architect, employee, designer, things that are ultimately making me more well-rounded for my experience here. So all those things that I'm doing outside of the office are only going to help me inside the office. Rather that sometimes I think people think of it being a confrontation where they have to set a work boundary or sometimes I've heard a lot of people struggle with family boundaries, like where they have a contentious relationship with person X or person Y in their family, and just creating some kinds of boundaries like that to really maintain their stress levels. I think it really comes down to, you know, keeping a kind of, there's always going to be something happening in your life, but it's just a matter of managing and mitigating kind of how much stress you're letting in and like what you do with it when you have stress.
That is really valuable advice. I think another challenge most young graduates face is that burnout is most common in architecture schools, like pulling all-nighters, surviving just on coffee, constant exhaustion. It's like a badge of honor. How do we begin to change this mindset as we enter professional practice?
It's an important question. So I think the idea of us working hard and sort of burning the midnight oil, or whatever kind of phrase you want to put in there. I remember working a lot during school, and it being something that really was taxing on me, and something that um, there were a couple evenings in particular that I remember even still from school. This is like 20 years ago, and you have these really important projects, and you want to do your best because you're at school, you're paying a lot of money to be there, you're really trying to do your best so that you can ultimately create a great portfolio, and then you can go into the workforce and get a really great job. And I think there's a lot of pressure and a lot of sort of old ways of thinking about the profession, where there's something that we glorify about the hard work, and that somehow our worth is tied to time. And not it like effort is good in ways, but it doesn't have to be so much that we sort of destroy ourselves in the process. And I think of a couple people that in hindsight in my class even you would see these people, they would kind of get their projects done in half the time, do all their other coursework, and then show up and still get A's or still get like high marks. And you're just like, how are you doing that? I'm here like all night and I'm here, I'm doing all these things. And I think that those people, for whatever reason, had a natural inclination for balance or harmony in their lives more than maybe a lot of us do. And I would say that I'm naturally more inclined to that sort of chaotic, I just want to work until, everything's perfect. And I think we we have this idea of what the perfect version of our project will be. And then as soon as we start working on it, we realize, oh, well, we need to do this and we need to do that. And there's all these different steps that we didn't anticipate in the process. And I think the creative process in general just takes time. So we think that if we just push all of our effort and time towards the work, that it'll just figure itself out. And I think the reality is it has to almost be the opposite way, where you reverse engineer kind of what you are willing to accept for the project, but also what you're willing to accept for your boundaries as you're working on the project. As people leave school and they enter the workforce, there are firms that will ask you to work ungodly hours and will ask you to be there all the time. And I think that that's a really unfortunate part of our profession in general. I've been fortunate to work at several places because of how I've sort of set myself up, I guess, in my own career, or I've been, as you're looking for a job, it's part trying to find the job, but also making sure that you have a fit with the place that you're going to work at. And I know that that's sometimes easier said than done, especially in a market like the one that we have right now. But whatever you can do to make that work, whether it's through getting the job at the place that you want to, or once you're there, setting those kinds of boundaries that we were talking about earlier, where you are cultivating your experience as you go in the workforce at your job. You're trying your best to control what you can control. And I would say don't glorify the work process as something where you're going to somehow win an award or a medal, because you're just the person that's there at midnight. That's not really how the process works. I think in a different way, it's about leaning into the strengths of the people around you and making sure that everybody's clear about what the process is. And even if you're a younger staff member starting in a new project or a new firm, asking a lot of questions to be very clear about what your role is, I think is something that a lot of people, I find, because I'm in a position where I'm mentoring people or I'm managing people, they don't often ask. And sometimes I'll have to even like sit down and be like, it's okay to like ask more questions. Like if you just don't know, I'd rather that you ask me rather than you spin your wheels and, stress out about it and put that on yourself, because the reality is in the long run, you'll be better for it and the project will be better for it if we're just all clear about what's going on. So I think rather than glorifying the working till midnight and pushing that, I think it's more about trying to be curious and ask questions and understand sort of how you fit into a given project. Because I don't think that, even though the profession has these sort of old-timey ways of thinking about working really hard, I think the average person, especially in my generation right now, probably doesn't feel the same. So if you were to ask, because we've gone through it too, we've burned out, we've had those experiences, and we're here to help that next generation hopefully not burn out if we can. So yeah.
Makes so much sense. One part you spoke about was being chronically online or being available at all times. As a graduate myself, I do struggle with it. I feel the need to reply to the email as early as I can. So, how can we change that mindset?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's tough to feel like you always have to be online, whether it's for work or for personal. Like I just saw a video by I don't know if you know him. He's a writer and kind of a thought leader, Sahil Bloom. Um, he had a video recently on his YouTube channel that was talking about how to disconnect from your phone, like how to stop phone addiction, basically. And he had a lot of good ideas about making the screens black and white and setting specific times where you're not allowed to even look at your phone or you have to put them in a completely different room. And I think part of it is that connection with the phone, whether it's looking on social media or looking at work email. One boundary that I have a hard line stance on is I don't have any work email on my phone at all. So I deliberately say when I leave work, it's not that somebody can't, in theory, call me from the office or from, that really needs me. At like a normal-ish hour, like so hopefully a reasonable hour. But if it's like on a weekend or if it's something that I know I can address at another time, I'm going to do that at my next block of work time. I'm going to do that when I'm focused on that point, kind of like I was mentioning before, is being present in that moment of whatever part of your life is, I think is really important. So trying to, I think, similar to the question about thinking that we need to be always on to work, to like work really hard. It's a similar kind of line of thought, right? Where you feel naturally, I realize that I do sometimes, where you always have to be connected. There's this sort of FOMO, fear of missing out, that you're somehow going to miss something because everything's so fast on the internet too, that you're going to somehow miss out on a cultural beat or you're going to miss out on important information. And I think that fear keeps us coming back for more. It keeps us kind of on that hamster wheel of trying to, it's not always, sometimes it's doom scrolling. Sometimes it's not really even like actually doing anything productive or meaningful or good. I can't remember what the counts are, but there's some studies out that they think that the average person will spend like years of their lives on their phone, by the time that they've, over the course of their life. And it's just, when you think about it like that, it feels kind of crazy, that we spend so much effort, trying to manifest or like cultivate our lives the way we want to. And we spend a lot of time on the phone or we spend a lot of time on, wherever online. I think that similar to what I said about creating boundaries though and expectations really with the team around you is to say, like, I will physically say to people, I don't have work email on my phone. And it just is kind of one of those things. I will tell people on my team, I will let them know, like, I'm not available after I leave this office. Because I think that people react to things like that, where you are very clear with them and you say, look, I can't do this for my own mental health. I'm trying to, do better overall in my life. And I think people react to that, especially when it's not confrontational. I think honestly, the other thing is just keeping time for yourself that is just very much not directly connected to the internet. I personally, with my fiance, we will go hiking a lot. So we'll intentionally be out in nature, and like there's no service in some places, and you can't use the phone anyway. Trying to do as many of those kinds of things and integrating that kind of stuff, I think, is helpful too, if it's possible for you. Yeah, and the other thing that kind of came out of the Sahil's recent video was that, like, physically keeping your phone in a different room is one of the most important things, to just put that aside, out of sight, out of mind. Something he said really resonated with me. It's like 10% of your functioning attention is lost when the phone is even in the room. So whether or not you're even on it, it's just you're already at a deficit. And I'm thinking, is there a way for you to create specific times. Like one thing I've done in the past that has been somewhat successful is it gets harder when you start managing more and more projects. But when it really kind of would work maybe for emerging professionals in particular is trying to set times when you look at your work email and set times when you are actually in production mode. So I would recommend maybe checking it at midday and when you're about to leave work, but not first thing in the morning. Because if you're checking it first thing in the morning, you take on the problems of whatever that fire is, that immediate need, especially if you're already working on a deadline where you have to focus on that project. I think to your question before about how do we not work a lot or take that into sort of our, how do students going into the workforce not take that mentality in? It's about not giving yourself new things and new problems all the time to try to solve on top of the problems that you're already trying to solve. So feeling like you're always on creates that dissonance where you feel like you need to, oh, well, this person said this is an important thing now, so now I have to jump to that, and then I have to jump to that. And you feel the chaos all the time versus just trying to do something methodically. So I think that doing what you can to limit phone stuff would be the first thing. And then the second thing would be keep creating those better habits at work if you can with email. So you're not constantly, it's not social media, it doesn't need to be. I don't think anybody's ever sent me an emergency email where it was like, if there's a real emergency, somebody's going to call me. Somebody's going to actually be on the phone and say, we need you right now. We need to talk about this. If it's an email, it's a record of what's happening. And that's kind of how I think about it.
It's really helpful to think about it that way. We spoke a lot about developing these habits, but how can one sustain it over the time of the career? What do you think are some challenges that young graduates or even you face while trying to balance everything? And what would you advise to overcome those?
Yeah, I think it's really good questions. I think that the sustaining stuff, it's tough in general to say how directly to sustain things. I think the great thing about what you're doing here, Nikita, honestly, is you're asking the questions very early on and very interested in trying to understand it. I don't think I actually really started thinking about my good habits until I was probably 30, like early 30s. And it really came to a head when I burned out myself. And I'm just like, I have to change how I think about my career and my life. So what had happened, this is 9-ish years ago. I just got to a point where I looked at myself in the mirror and I'm just like, this is not who I want to be. I can't be this person anymore. I was 75 pounds overweight and I was, like ruining friendships and relationships. And it felt like things were, I was working too much, as we do, if we're not kind of aware of how much we're working. I was doing, I've always been somebody who does this sort of extra stuff outside of the office. So I had a 9-to-5 job, which was not completely 9-to-5. It was, spreading out into other hours. And then I was a committee member or a board member on the local AIA, American Institute of Architecture in Buffalo, New York. So I'm doing committee things, and then I'm starting emerging professional committee things. And then I started a blog and I got licensed, and all these things are happening, and it's really great professionally. But then you look around and your life feels like it's on fire, where it's just, you don't feel like you're the same person that you were before. Even like in school when I felt like I at least still had some sort of like activity level where I was doing things. I was out with friends, or I played a little bit of soccer. I was way less active, and I think asking the questions prevents that life scenario from happening as much. I think if you're asking those questions, it's the first step in sort of getting out of burnout or preventing burnout. Like really what I think causes burnout is stress that is unresolved over time. So you're creating these habits ultimately so that you're creating these release valves for the stress to be released a little bit at a time, maybe not all at once, but that you're never reaching that threshold where it feels like it's way too much for you. And when it hit me, I I had been writing a blog for a while, for about a year and a half prior to my burnout. I just stopped cold turkey for a year because I'm like, I need to cut back all those things that I just mentioned back to almost nothing so that I can almost build back up in a good way, the things that I wanted. So I ended up taking the next 6 months and really working on my health. That was my number one priority above absolutely everything else. So I ended up losing that weight, and I've kept it off since, and I've created those kinds of good habits for my day-to-day life. One of the things that I really remember specifically just telling myself was, what is something I can cut out from my life permanently it's a bad thing, a vice or something like that, that will really represent kind of the movement that I'm working towards. And for me, it was soda. So like Coke, Pepsi, all that stuff. And I haven't had anything since. So it's been about 9 years since I've had any of that stuff. And like, is it one of those things where I feel like I could probably reintroduce it into my life? Maybe, but I was so addicted to that sugary kind of like way of drinking things and then eating that I thought it was the way to fuel me being able to work more at the time. Like it felt like it was just like a way to manage the energy level roller coaster that I was on, which I was probably actually doing more harm to myself by giving myself those things. But I think the reason I tell that story is more to say I wasn't asking questions. I wasn't asking questions until after I had fully burned out and said, this is enough. Whereas I think when you're more proactive about self-awareness is a word that I use a lot for avoiding and preventing burnout or even getting out of burnout, is where are you right now? What is your baseline? And what do you want to do a year from now, 5 years from now? And again, almost how do you reverse engineer what that looks like? So like if, as an example, I really got invested in running a couple years ago, and I wanted to ultimately run a half marathon. So I know I can't run a half marathon based on, just starting to run a lot. So what does that look like? And whether it's a personal goal or a work goal, like maybe you want to get your license, or you want to get something that will, or you want to get a certain position at your firm, or you want to work on a certain kind of project, or you want to do something specific. Like, what are the steps you need to take to get there versus that sort of chaos that we just like invite in our work lives, where it's like, okay, well, what is this fire and what is this fire? And we're not asking those questions until we're overwhelmed and stressed out and we feel like we don't have a way backwards, when I think in reality, if you slowly over time are working your way forward the way that you want to, that's probably the better way. So like to answer your question more directly, how can you sustain the habits? I think you aren't going to sustain all of the habits equally over time. I think you have to be very deliberate about health first, I would say, is always my priority. Trying to walk as much as I can every day, drink water, just like simple things. But those simple things allow me more space to do all the other stuff. And I think creating those very sort of clear rules for yourself, and then, like I said, experiment with some of the other habits. There will be times in your life when the priority is potentially just your family, or it's something that you're working on personally, like my goal to run a half marathon, or it's something where your habits might change, but maybe the baseline ones stay the same. The foundation of what your life is to let everything else operate is the same. but you overcome the challenges of habits, being kind of bombarded with stress and things like that by creating better boundaries, um, and just keep asking the questions. I think as we're talking through this, I just realized that I just wasn't asking a lot of questions to myself. And when you continue to reflect on it, journaling has helped me a lot. I have it's a simple, I don't know if you've ever seen this, Ryan Holiday, the author, kind of brought me onto this, where he has a one-line journal. It's for 5 years though. So every day you write one line, and it's kind of, intimidating when you first start it, because you're like, this is 5 years of the next 5 years of my life. But you write one line, it's very simple, and you get to see each page has all 5 years for that day. So today, as we're recording it, I'll see the last several years of what I did on that day. And you can start to see patterns of how you are, interacting with the day, what was important to you, what wasn't important to you. Maybe it was just a mundane day. Maybe it was just an average day, and that's okay too. But then when those other days pop up, whether they're good or bad, you start to see patterns in how you react to them. And I think a combination of self-awareness and asking these questions, and a combination of looking backwards and reflecting, is really helpful, to overcome that kind of stuff.
So much for sharing your story. It really made me reflect on my life and my current goals. I'm sure everyone listening would relate as well. We spoke a lot about building these habits and sustaining them. How much do you think is it an individual thing? What role do friends, mentors, colleagues, and other people play in this journey?
I think that that's a really good question. The people around you are really important in terms of how easy it is, I guess, to fulfill the habits and the boundaries and the things that you're, working on for yourself every day. I think the one caveat is kind of what I hinted at before, where some of these things you just have to set hard boundaries and kind of see how the world reacts. And sometimes people are going to be a little bit, less understanding, or they're going to be a little bit confused about why you're doing that. And I think the thing to consider is, it's not a selfish thing in a bad way, I think, to take care of yourself. And I mean, it literally is selfish, but I guess in the sort of bad connotation, it's not selfish necessarily. Um, I think inviting people into why you're making some of the decisions can help, especially if they're very close to you. So if you are, let's say you need to take time for when I burned out, I had to take time for myself. So I was actually, especially for a few months, I was very introspective and just trying to figure out what to do next. And so I wasn't spending as much time with pretty much anybody. And it was a way for me to reflect on things, work on my health, and just be very focused on, here's what I need to do. And some people didn't really understand why I was necessarily pulling away, and it wasn't necessarily because of them. It was more of just like a heads up of, I am working on myself and I'm going to be doing these things, and there's nothing wrong. I'm just, I'm just like actively trying to better myself right now. And I think that that is helpful. And I think that especially if you are having trouble at work as an architect, having conversations with people at your level, below your level, and above your level in different ways. I mean, it's not the same conversation. So as an example, for me as a project manager leading teams, I am typically, especially if because I can see patterns in, the people that I mentor, similar patterns to either the drive that they have that I had, when I was at that point in my career, or I can see when somebody's stressed out. And I'm an empathetic person. I would hope, people are doing this out in the world too. But I'm going to ask the question of, are you okay? Are you doing okay? Is there anything happening in your life? Because I've been at that place where there is something wrong, and it's not necessarily that you have to divulge anything. It's not a question to say, how tell me your life story. It's more of just like, I'm a person who is concerned about you as another person. What can I do to help, make this? We still have to do the job. We still have to do the work, but how can we do this in, the best way for you, I guess, in that moment. And I think the same, especially if you're working with a good collaborative team, that works the opposite way too, where if you are able and willing to confide in somebody who is managing you or mentoring you and just say, look, I'm not really sure what I should be doing right now. I don't know how much I'm even supposed to know at this point in my career on this thing. Like, what is the expectation from you as somebody who works with people like me that I should be focusing on? Like, I don't expect, as an example, for somebody to come out of school and know exactly how to just right away design a fully complete construction document set ready wall section. That's not a thing. It's not a thing that I expect somebody's just going to do that in a morning and then give it to me the next day and we're just going to send it out and it's all done. Like, it's about creating levels and steps and ways of thinking about different kinds of assemblies, and there's a process there. I know that younger people are going to have a certain level of expertise, maybe in, like, a really good example is if you're really good at 3D modeling, and you can do that faster than I can because you're more embedded in Revit or ArchiCAD or something that is, you're very in tune with whatever the most up-to-date software is that's coming out of school. Maybe you can teach me things that I might be interested in, but I just don't know about, and vice versa. So I think it's just a matter of having that dialogue back and forth of saying, wherever you are, can you talk to the people around you in a way that resonates with them and will help them understand where you are and help them, I guess, get you to wherever you want to be too. Like, I think that people are pretty reasonable when it comes to the goals that we have and the kinds of things that we want to do for our lives and our careers. So it's just a matter of how do we have those conversations?
You have been mentoring people for a long time. What is some advice you would like to give to emerging creatives?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's something that I'm really actually passionate about. I've been helping emerging professionals and young graduates for pretty much my entire career. I felt like there was, especially when I got out of school, there wasn't a forum or like a mechanism for really like transitioning into the profession. And I don't necessarily know if there still is, but I've done my best to try to facilitate those kinds of conversations over time. And I think that the thing that I would say is you just don't need to do everything all at once. I think there's a feeling like you need to get the best job possible in the best, like, most perfect location that you're ever going to work in. And I think the reality is that people move around the profession. It's a natural thing for you to move from place to place, whether it's ever, like, for me, I was at my first job for about 6 years, and then I moved to another job for about 6 years, and I've been at the job that I have now for about 5. So you are going to naturally probably move around the profession anyway. And I would say try to take in as much as you can from the people around you and really do ask those questions, because you're going to find that as you move through those different places and projects, like, you're never going to have quite the same experience from one project to the next. You're going to have different problems. You're going to have different people you work with. You're never going to have that same formula or concoction of combination of people and things happening ever again. It's just unique to the way that we have the creative process in architecture. And so I'm always constantly learning on projects even now. It's not like I stopped learning. So I try to go into each project with a mindset of, like, what is a either a typology or a construction type or even a software. What is something that I can take away or try on this project that I didn't try on the last one, and see where it goes, see what you can learn from it. And I think aside from being curious and asking questions, the other thing that I think I did a lot of relatively, but I kind of wish I had done more, and I'm trying to do better now, is just make connections with people, like yourself, Nikita, whether it's you talking to you about these kinds of topics, or it's just trying to see how other people think about the profession and what we can learn from each other. And sometimes that results in these interesting relationships where you either could find a mentor or you could find somebody that you vibe with because you have similar ideologies about how the profession is supposed to happen and unfold. And I think that those are really important. If you can be curious and find more people that are going to help you along on your journey, I think that that's probably what I would say to most emerging professionals.
That's really insightful. That is true. Experience and connections, it is really valuable for any graduate to have. After everything that you have spoken about, the experience, and after all these years, what has kept you inspired and enthusiastic about architecture even today?
I think that in general, what keeps me inspired is knowing that every day is going to be a little bit different. And I think that like today, and I appreciate you rescheduling our meeting here, but like I did not expect that something was going to happen, even though it was chaotic this morning. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps you, architects ultimately are problem solvers, and we are solving all kinds of problems. And sometimes they're constructability problems. Sometimes they're almost like anthropological or psychological kind of problems. Sometimes they are design. Sometimes, there's a wide variety of things that I feel like I am doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that because architecture can be a profession that is very unexpected at times, but also very engaging and can lead you into new ways of thinking. Like I think that if I was in a job, as an example, where I had to do the same thing over and over for, 40 years, I don't think that I'm built that way to do that kind of thing. And I think that at the very least, architecture is a wonderful profession that keeps me engaged and enthusiastic about it, because there's always new technology. There's new people who are coming into the profession. There are questions around how to be better or do better in the profession. And the work has changed. Like I have projects that are, like I said earlier, like in construction now, but they've been in my life for 5 years. And then I have projects that are, only over the course of a matter of months. And having that sort of cadence of small projects, big projects, projects that are, I've worked on schools, I've worked on houses, I've worked on institutional buildings, I've worked on commercial projects, big sizes, small sizes. I think finding those kinds of projects that you really engage with, which for me, it actually feels more like I'm more interested in the problem solving. So it's less about the typology of the project and more about the kinds of problems I might get to solve on the project. But some people might actually be very enthusiastic about one typology, like houses, or, some people really like building hospitals and designing hospitals. So, like maybe there's a very particular thing, or schools or towers or whatever, like you find what that thing is for you, whether it's everything or just one specific typology, and learn more about it and engage with it every day. And I think for me, that's been the most inspiring thing, is I get to do a lot of different things over the course of a year. And that's why when I look back at each year, it's always very different from the year before that.
Such an amazing perspective to end with. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences and insights. I definitely have a lot to take away from this conversation. You have motivated me, but have also reminded me to slow down and question how I want to shape my career. Thanks a lot for talking to us today.
Yeah, it was wonderful talking to you. Thank you for having me here, and I appreciate it.